everybody. Welcome to the Secular Dharma Foundation Lecture and Dialogue series. I think this is number 4. We've been doing these once a month, and we appreciate you coming. Very happy to be here with Erin Treat this evening, who I've known for quite some time and have been very kind and generous to me and giving me many teaching opportunities, in particular down at Vallecitos, which is in northern New Mexico. Some of you may have sat there in the past or may sit there in the future. And if you are going to practice outside in the wilderness, I cannot think of a better place to do it. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Erin. Thank you very much for being here. And I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. It's wonderful that you are offering this podcast, Dave, and just really happy to see some of you here. Yeah, looks like new friends. And I'll say a little bit about what I have discovered and continue to learn about the power of practicing meditation within the natural world. We're actually always within the natural world, even when we're in a building, right? Our bodies are made of earth, and we can never be separate from earth. When I started teaching retreats at Vallecitos over a decade ago, there was kind of this phrase that was floating around, oh, at Vallecitos, the land is our teacher. And it was something I really became curious about, and that I have for over a decade been listening into. And I teach Buddhist meditation, practice Buddhist meditation. And where did the Buddha mostly practice? He mostly practiced in the forest. And when we turn to the pith instructions given for us to begin to grow our mindfulness, the instructions from the Satipatthana Sutta in the very beginning, the instruction is to basically go to a place that's remote and secluded and sit down at the root of a tree and begin paying attention to the flow of the breathing. And why is that important for us to be able to sit down at the root of a tree? I know when I sit down and I practice at the root of a ponderosa tree, I begin to feel myself in a more expanded way. Going through my life and just the fullness of my day, it's so easy to be right up here in the coconut, thinking, churning it out, past, present, future, churning out my thoughts and my ideas and my identities, that I may believe about myself or other people. But there's something going to sit at the root of a tree. We begin to feel ourselves in relationship. We begin to feel ourselves belonging to something larger than just what's inside this skin. When I sit down at the root of a tree, it's interesting, right? Because we use the word tree and it seems like a thing, a ponderosa tree, but a tree's not a thing. A tree is a flow of living processes unfolding. A tree is a constant cycle of birth and death. Now, the tree wouldn't exist without the roots that are nourished by the fungi system of the ground. And when you sit at the base of a tree, it's like, oh, this thing that seems so big and solid, we begin to feel that it's actually moving a little bit. Not unlike, our own spine when we breathe. Nature deficit disorder, some of you have heard of nature deficit disorder, is real. There are people who come from urban life to practice with us who have never been on a hike, who come to the land and say, I've wanted to go on a hike my whole life. I've never been on a hike. And I see the hunger, like a deep, deep hunger for the nourishment of how it is to remember ourselves in relationship with the elements of water and earth and fire and air. And we kind of can't think ourselves into being in relationships with the elements in this way. It's something that's present moment and experiential and so much. I don't know about you. I don't know about the particularities of your own places of happiness, places of suffering. But so much of what the Buddha taught, and so much of what I see time and again, is that so much of the stress and contraction and real pain we feel has to do with some sense of disbelonging, some sense of there's something wrong with me, some sense of somehow being apart from our own hearts, apart from our own belonging. Practicing in nature, there's a way that we begin to come into contact in a way that allows the nervous system to start to co-regulate, not just with other people, but to begin to co-regulate with the natural world that is here for us. And there's a way, if you've practiced, outdoors, that the land meditates us. It's not so much that we're meditating on the land. That's a certain feel, right? I'm meditating on the land. Another way of holding it is that, oh, I am experiencing awareness within the land. A meditation practice is a practice of exploring awareness, and awareness isn't one thing that we can just pin down. You might feel the presence of awareness right now. Awareness is way bigger than our bodies. Awareness isn't just inside of our skin. Awareness is vast like the sky, vast like a field. And practicing in the natural world is inviting us into an experience of awareness that is relational, that's sensate, that is highly impressionable. I also think that, in my experience, practicing outside begins to touch into a feeling of the sacred. If you consider what draws you to practice, it's important that practice is practical. But most of what keeps us practicing is some sense of a heart connection, some sense of reverence, love, care. It's like we are meditating, opening to something that has the flavor of kind of that which is worthy of honor, respect, something that has to do with the mystery. And it's healing to be in contact with the mystery in this way. Because, like the trees, they're not judging you. The rivers, they're not judging you. They're not telling you to get it together, do better, figure yourself out. They're not embodying the kind of reactivity that the human mind knows so well. So there's something just basking in the presence of these life forms that are not caught up in the reactivity that we suffer from so much. That's an invitation that allows for our own reactivity to begin to settle. And as that settles, you might find, I know for me, I find that these beautiful qualities of the heart mind arise. There's the capacity for wonder, kind of childlike wonder and delight. There's the capacity to kind of open to the flow of reality where we're not careening inside of our ideas about things quite so much. We open to the present moment in a deeper way. It's really interesting that we kind of talk about practicing in the natural world, because it's not an innovation, right? It's a returning. Most of Dharma practices happened outside for a very, very, very long time. I could say a lot more. Maybe I should pause here, Dave. I could go on and on. Maybe you can share some and we can continue our conversation.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that. Focus a little more on the first part of it, the benefits and kind of my personal experience working in the natural world. One of my first teachers, who I still consider my primary teacher, Stephen Smith, who actually taught at Vallecitos many times in the early years, used to always encourage me to teach retreats in scenically beautiful places that are hard to get to. That was always his suggestion, and Vallecitos definitely hits home on both fronts. Um, so, as somebody who struggles or has struggled in the past with addiction and things like trauma, one thing about the natural world I think that it offers is for many of us, I think when you get out to a spot like Vallecitos and you get out into nature, you experience a kind of digital detox. You know, we really do detox off the devices. And I love the fact that the phone doesn't even work out there. Like, don't even bother. You're not going to get any bars. And so there's this way we kind of detox from the digital world, and all that comes with that. We could talk about that all night. We also detox from eating crappy food. I know that I do. I mean, the food that they serve out there is very, very natural. It's very, very clean. It's very, very clean eating. And there's a way in which, and I just want to say that could actually be painful. Detox, anybody who's ever done that. And it can be kind of painful in the early stages where it's actually, we can talk about being in nature and how beautiful and wonderful it is in which it is. But at the beginning, it can be like really hard because you don't have any of your preferences. You don't have your screen. You don't have your computer. You don't have your refrigerator. You don't have, you really are just kind of left to the device. You're really left to your own mind in this natural space. And there's a book I think that really is relevant here by a teacher named Sayadaw Tejaniya called When Awareness Becomes Natural, which is one of the ways that we teach often at Vallecitos because it's so conducive. And it's really this way of, I love the way Erin said it because it's so spot on. Like, you don't go out there and meditate, like there's really not a lot of doing that happens out there. A lot of times we think about meditation like something that we're going to do, and we're so already as a culture in what's called modal confusion. We're so in the mode of doing and having. That's kind of our mode that we're in. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to have this, and then I'm going to have that. Well, when you get out there on the land, there's nothing to do or to have, really. And you really get introduced to the being mode, which is really kind of what the Buddha awoke to, the world of present time awareness, the world of the sounds of the birds coming and going, the world of the water washing over the rocks, this very slow world where things happen really, really slowly, the world of contemplative living, really, where you're even detoxing from that, because you get out there, it's like I remember, I practiced out there a couple years ago with Mark Coleman, and it's like, and as a teacher or somebody who loves this stuff, you find yourself walking around on day three being like, God, there's just nothing to do here. There really is nothing to do there. That's the whole point. And so we get into this being mode, and really, I think in many ways, um, what I found for me the most benefit of that is my nervous system. The nervous system has gotten a lot more attention in the last decade because of things like Peter Levine's work and a lot of the work around trauma and a lot of the kind of junk in garbage that we hold in our system. We oftentimes say the mind and the heart, which is fine, but a lot of it really sits in our nervous system and the way that our nervous system is regulated or not regulated, or in many ways dysregulated. And whether you like the teachers or whether you don't like the teachers or whether you care about Buddhism or the Dharma, that's all fine and good. But you spend enough of time, 2 or 3 days in the natural world, and your nervous system will regulate itself naturally. You don't actually have to do anything. And, this is when we start to, from an addiction model, we move from that addiction to the detoxification into the recovery, into a natural state of being, into a way of life, something of that which is already there, which is the way I think about the Dharma sometimes. It's that which is already there. I'm just cut off from it. I'm cut off from it. And a lot of times I'm cut off from it. Maybe I don't feel like Erin did a great job playing that. Sometimes maybe I don't feel like I belong to it or I'm unworthy or whatever destructive narrative I have about myself and the world that I live in. it's really hard to feel like you don't belong when you're sitting in the middle of 500,000 acres of like pristine alpine wilderness. It's really hard for that story to emerge. And there's a kind of intuitive wisdom that just arises really in the somatic experience. And for lack of a better word, you just start to feel good. It just feels good. And all of a sudden, it's like the screen and the phone and the refrigerator and all your preferences that you think are so important, all your little creature comforts that you think you enjoy, you realize actually you're in many ways enslaved by those things. And that we actually live in a prison of preference. And when those things are removed, when there's a renunciation, when we forego those things that don't serve us, we just arrive in this natural awareness. We arrive in this natural wisdom. And really, I find that there's a natural gravitation in my heart that's kind of like, oh yeah, whatever this is what I need. This is what I want. And you're not going to get it from listening to a podcast. You're not going to get it from listening to this conversation. You're not going to read it in a book, you know? Nothing really profound and really that meaningful is ever going to happen to you on a screen. That's just not going to happen. And not that screens are bad or wrong. We're all on one right now, you know? So that's the reality of the world that we live in. And actually, I think Erin sat at one of my students, Andrew Chapman, sat at many years ago. There's a really wonderful Buddhist monk named Ajahn Suchito who had a retreat at Vallecitos. I believe it was called Rewilding the Mind. In many ways, that's what happened is we rewild. We really get to come into the experience of trying to be tuned into things that aren't dictated by time, by space, by pressure, by calendar, by schedule. All that stuff kind of starts to slip away. And one of the things that really becomes interesting for me is, we talk about how life is stressful and that's why we do this kind of work. But one of the things I think that's most stressful that we don't talk about is just the concept of time. Like time, just even saying it right now, I feel stressed out. I mean, I just actually just looked at my clock. I'm like, how much time have I been talking for? Like, I'm already stressed. It's like there's not enough time. I need to be on time. They better be on time. This idea of time and the pressure that we have around it. And really, all you do actually have is time. And when you start to get in the kind of mysterious psychedelic nature of the Dharma verse, you start to wake up to the fact that time's not even real. There's no such thing as time. We just made it up. And if you want to be on a Zoom call at 6 p.m., time's very conventional. It's a really great device, but it's not real. We just took impermanence and we just chopped it up into hours, minutes, weeks, seconds, and years. But when you break free from the pressure of that, something like 20 minutes sitting next to a river can feel like a decade. And when you really get in touch with this experience of the Dharma in these kind of places where you're out in the woods, there's other than me, there's nothing in any of my sensory awareness that gives me any hint of humanity or any of the things that we've created. I can't hear it, I can't see it, I can't smell it. And there's a returning. I think Erin said that best. This is not an innovation. It's not like we invented nature retreats. There's no innovation here. There's no technology. It's anti-technology, really. It's a returning. It's a returning. It's a recovering experience. And I'll get out on the skinny branches for a second here, but it can't not happen for you. It just can't not happen. There's just no way a human being can spend 5 or 7 days in nature in an experience where you're just not going to get in touch with that. I just don't see it happening. I've never seen it happen. I've probably taught at Vallecitos, I don't know, 10 times anyway. I've never seen it not happen for everybody there, you know? And I've seen people go there who just, there was one, I'll end with this. There was a woman from Chicago on our retreat last year who had no idea about the Dharma or mindfulness or Buddhism or any of this. She just was like on her computer and Googled like nature programs. And like Vallecitos popped up. Good job on those guys getting up in the Google search, for example. So she just thought she was like, she had no idea. And then she gets to, she's like, you mean there's no talking? There's no meat? There's no. And you know, she had no idea what any of this was, and she probably had a better experience than any of the other participants. She literally got blown wide open in a way, and I think she's actually going to be back this year.
Just mentioned, I love that you brought up time. And I don't know. It's easy to feel frantic and in a rush, not just in our minds, but even in our bodies, right? You know, that feeling of getting out of your car, heading into the grocery store, and you realize that you're already on the other side of that grocery store trip in your mind. Like we spend so much of our time jacked up in our nervous system, and even the way I just used language, spending time, as if time is something to be spent. There's something really powerful for me about land as Dharma teacher that has to do with timelessness. There's a tree within the land we call Vallecitos that's this big ponderosa tree, 800 years old. Like 800 years is a long time to be alive. And I reflect upon this tree, and I reflect upon the fact that this tree has so many stories to tell, has seen so much come and go, and that this tree was probably a very small little tree that was here in the land we now call New Mexico, you know, long before this whole country was even colonized. This tree was here in 1492. It's just really remarkable. Sometimes we never look for, you know, artifacts. And if we find an artifact, we put it back. But people find implements, you know, implements that are thousands of years old. Implements that were probably created by people who were living maybe at the time that these Buddhist teachings we're talking about, you know, first came into being in this way. It's remarkable in that way. So land as Dharma teacher, there is a dimension of timelessness. And I know when I consider the quality of timelessness, my little urgencies or cravings, gotta have this now, like a lot more space begins to come in. The attention can move from this narrow focus of gratification into a much more spacious place. So timelessness is one of the teachings that really comes alive on the land. Another one is impermanence. You know, one of our greatest illusions that we carry, right, is like, we all know we're going to die, but we kind of don't think we're going to die. And when we know, not just in a superficial way, but in a deeper way, when we know the truth of our own mortality, what does it do? It changes. It changes how we live. It changes how we come to the moment. The choices we make become different because our lives are made more precious. And I can't tell you how often we've invited practitioners to kind of go out and, like Dave said, slow down and actually, you know, settle into a period of time, maybe just hanging out in one place. And maybe that place is sitting by the river, just watching ants do their thing. Have you ever watched ants for a long time? They're pretty entertaining. There's a lot that goes on in the lives of ants, but often, you know, we wind up in the forest, and rather than seeing only the life, the beautiful life forms, the flowers, the paintbrush, the columbine, we also begin to see the decay We begin to see that when a log falls, it decays, it falls away. We begin to see that even the most powerful thunderstorm, there's a point when it's gone, it's over. We begin to see that life, the land holds life and the land also holds death. The two go together. And there begins to be, as we see more and more deeply, the cycles of life and death that are always at work. Things begin to settle in the heart quite a bit more. Things get more real in a certain way. We don't have to try so hard to keep everything exactly how we want it all the time, but we can begin to settle back into the rising and passing. It's what makes things beautiful. There's this tree that's probably been dead for quite a while, big tree. And we were playing around with naming things a while ago. Like, what do you name things? It's interesting because this tree that's dead is the home of so much life. There's all of these creatures with nests in the tree. There's all of these ways that that this dead tree is a giver of life. And one of the kind of key insights that we cultivate in insight meditation is seeing into the truth of inconstancy. And being on the land in a way that's like slow, without an agenda, is just natural. And then we stop fighting this truth of change so much in our minds. We begin to accept the changes in our bodies, in our lives, in our hearts. And there's something about how it's easy in modern life to project like a conceptual understanding of what's out there. We project a conceptual understanding, and this path of meditation is really about moving from a thought-based reality to a sense-based reality. That's kind of some of what Dave was talking about with the screens. And being within the land invites us more and more deeply into a sense-based reality. And people hear the land whispering to them, singing to them, offering to them. They feel it. They feel the land, the benevolence of the land in a way that is really, really quite beautiful. And there's a way that, for most of human consciousness, they've lived in an animate universe. Like rocks haven't just been things. And then the world is ensouled in a certain way. And so practicing with land as a Dhamma teacher opens us to the sentience of many life forms. And we play with different ways of perceiving. Meditation practice is largely about cultivating different ways of perceiving. If we're trained to see permanence, we cultivate the perception of impermanence. If we're trained to see self as separate and solid, we cultivate the perception of self as profoundly related and not separate, not solid. If we're used to being aware of where the sense of self feels thick, we pay attention to where it feels thinner, more gossamer. And I have to just pause for a minute to remember quite where I was going with that. Ways of perceiving. So we cultivate ways of perceiving for the purposes of practice. Many of you know how it is to practice with Brahmaviharas, like loving kindness, with metta, loving kindness. And we often know how it is to generate and offer loving kindness, which is so beautiful. A way of perceiving that we practice at Vallecitos is receiving loving kindness from the land. Receiving the felt sense of loving kindness from the thunderous presence of the canyon walls. That's a particular flavor of receiving the presence of care and kindness. Receiving the loving kindness that comes from the warmth of the sunshine if a person lays down in the meadow. That's another flavor of receiving loving kindness. Really opens us to these different ways of perceiving where we live in an ensouled world. I remember one time I was teaching a retreat for educators, and it was the first year we opened after the pandemic. And if any of you who are listening to this are educators, you probably have an appreciation of the measure of suffering and distress and grief that educators in general hold. And we were sitting in this circle, and we were just doing kind of an initial sharing. It was right before lunch, kind of late morning on the opening day. People were sharing, the educators were sharing about their traumas. They were sharing about how good it felt to be able to come on retreat again, to be able to come together, to turn toward what Dave was pointing to, just the power of being in wild nature. And they were weeping. They were weeping. They were having really healthy emotional expressions related to what they held the last few years. And it was really remarkable what happened. They were sharing so much, and right at the end of the sharing, there was this loud clap of thunder, loud like lightning and thunder, and out of nowhere, it started raining really, really, really hard. Just, it was a torrential kind of downpour. And we just paused, and there was a feeling like, oh, it was as if the sky was weeping the tears that needed to come out. It gave them permission to weep. People just sat and wept, and it was healing in a certain way. It was as if the sky was saying, I hear you. I receive you. We just sat. It was wondrous. And the rain fell, and it fell fast, and it fell really strongly. And then it stopped. And there was just being present in that feeling, that smell of the mist, the feeling of this has been a storm, the tears have flowed, and here we are now. And then the retreat began. But it felt like it's kind of remarkably responsive unfolding, that if we were in our thought-based reality more than our sense-based reality, you might just miss it. I just miss it. It was really a poignant expression, spontaneous expression of land as Dhamma teacher.
Really, really great. I want to name something here that I'm probably not going to say it correctly, so I'm just going to get it out of the way. Sometimes, and I put myself in this category, sometimes people can be suspicious of things that maybe we would say woo woo, or kind of like the idea of being in nature is kind of like not the real thing, or sometimes we can be suspicious of that kind of stuff. And if any of you out there are kind of that person, I ask you to push back against that, because I kind of am that person. And I love being in nature now. And just to say a story about that, I have a student who lives in the city, who's actually one of Shannon's students, my wife, who was at Rocky Mountain Eco Dharma with me last year, who came on the nature retreat very reluctantly. She's like, I don't know if I need to be in nature. I need like real hardcore Dharma, kind of like this rigid thing. And one of the last days, I took everybody out on the land to do a four elements practicing with the four elements. And she kind of said, she rolled her eyes and was like, oh, this is going to be some lame, woo woo element thing. And she came out, and I did the practice, and she said it was like the most mind blowing practice that she'd ever done. And she had to totally change her whole attitude about the whole nature thing. Which I find that to be so good, because a lot of times we can, I know that for me, one of the things that's been most liberating is really being curious about things I'm suspicious towards or I don't buy into, because they might sound a little bit out there. So I want to make a big plug for the mysteriousness of all this, especially the stuff that Erin pointed out. There's a mystery to all this that just we don't know anything about. And I find it to be very invigorating, and actually a lot of awe and wonder. And one more story. I had a retreat last year at Vallecitos. I sat at, actually, Erin was teaching the retreat. And it was like day 2 or 3, and I was having one of those moments where I was sitting on the steps out front and being like, yeah, it's kind of nice here, but I don't see what the big deal is. Like, it's just, it's just a lot of woods and nature. And I kind of was having this little doubt party and full of all this suspicion. And right at that moment, I don't know what kind of bird it was because there's tons of birds out there. I saw a bird in the sky, and the bird flew down into the pond, yanked this like 12 to 14-inch fish out of the pond in its mouth, flew up to the tree Erin was talking about, the dead tree, flew up and sat at the top of the tree, and I watched the bird eat the fish. And I was like, okay, all right, I need to rethink this whole thing. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And it totally happened when I was having one of these moments. I'm like, yeah, nature, and what's the big deal? And that's the kind of stuff that happens uh, out there. And so, as a teacher, I really feel dedicated. Most of the retreats I'm teaching this summer are of this variety. And to just even say a little bit more things that are uncomfortable, I actually don't really believe that people are the best Dharma teachers. And I realize I'm saying that as a person who's a Dharma teacher. And that really, when I think about retreat in nature, I don't really think of myself as a teacher, as more of a guide. As more of a guide and as more of somebody who's trying to hold a larger container where we're offering practices and suggestions. And really, I think what happens, and I've seen it happen so many times, the retreat teaches itself. I mean, as a guide or a teacher of the tree, I'm just trying really hard not to get in the way. I feel like is my job, but I just try not to get in the way because I know there's a natural progression to the practice that I think is so organic and so really actually built in that it can't really go sideways. Um, and there's a couple Dharma teachings I think that are important to highlight that I think really fit into this idea. And that is one of the most misunderstood, I think, and maybe poorly taught teachings is the teaching of Nibbana or Nirvana. Nirvana and Nibbana are the same word. Um, and usually, Nibbana in later schools of Buddhism became this word that I don't like to use very much called enlightenment. Most people associate Buddhism with enlightenment. And what kind of happens over time is enlightenment kind of got put on this really high pedestal that we thought maybe someday if we do this really hard, like we're going to get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and that's enlightenment. And I think that was a major, a bad move in Buddhist thought, frankly. If you look at the Thai forest tradition, they've done a really good job to push back against that. Ajahn Buddhadasa wrote a book called Nibbana for Everyone, which is like a 36-page pamphlet you can get for free on the internet. And there's a Nibbanic quality, I think, that's just built in. There's another quality to that which is already there. There's a kind of coolness of mind. There's a non-reactive experience. And when you get out into nature, you get this tremendous sense of this feeling. And I think what you're getting is really what the Buddha called Nibbana. There's a cooling of grasping, of confusion, of anger or hatred. There's just a way in which the heart orients itself towards these heart qualities, towards kindness and compassion. There's a kind of natural progression that happens. In later schools of Buddhism, in particular the Mahayana school, this is what they call Buddha nature. Some people know this word Buddha nature. And that's just the kind of Mahayana version of Nibbana in the early Buddhist school. It's this way in which we become integrated and we become attuned to this quality that is already there. That's really Nibbana as a natural property of the universe. It's not this special thing that the Buddhists have access to. It's like gravity. It's like the leaves falling off the tree. It's just literally there. And one of the reasons I love to sit with Ajahn Suchito is he teaches it very much this way. He jokingly will say it's in his really he did this really thick English accent, and he'll say it's right under your nose, and he's right. It's like literally right there. There's this liberation possibility that's not far, far away. That's not something that it's not the top of the mountaintop. It's literally built into the design of things. And one of the ways I think that you can I find that you'll stumble into that more likely in these natural environment retreats than maybe you will in kind of a rigid sitting walking practice. Maybe. That's been my experience. And I think a lot of that is because we oftentimes, because we live in a technological world, we oftentimes think of meditation as a kind of psychological technology in which there's a kind of technique that we're going to learn. And when we learn and master the technique, there's going to be some wonderful outcome at the other side of that. And by and large, that's probably true to some degree. There are certain meditative techniques and there are certain things that we want to learn how to do with like our attention and our intention. But that's really preliminary, I think. I feel like that's only preliminary to the point where we can be tuned into the present a moment enough for all this other stuff to just kind of give us access to these things. So it's not really about a method. And of course, within the Buddhist system, there's all kinds of different methods. Even in the Theravada system, there's even within the Burmese system, there's all these methods, and we want to learn the method and what's the right method and what teacher has the good method, and that can become problematic. It has been for me. Is I need to learn the method, and I'm going to get the cash and prizes, and actually, when the Buddha does his discussion of clinging, he talks about how we cling to four things. And one of the things that we cling to is the method. I have the right method, you know. And we think we have the right method in lots of things. Like I think I have the right method for making a grilled cheese, and my wife does not have the right method. And my 12-year-old will attest that I have the best method for making a grilled cheese. And maybe I do. But we really do. We get very clinging to methods in all kinds of ways that we don't even notice. And I think what we really want to try to understand, especially with something like mindfulness, is in many ways, mindfulness isn't really a technique that you learn. It's modal. It's the being mode. It's being in touch with experience. Now, there might be some techniques that you will learn that will help you have access to that mode. But like Erin said at the beginning, like I'm gonna go do the retreat. I'm gonna go do the, like we get into that doing mode of things. And one of the things that I've noticed for myself that's been so helpful is practicing out on the land and doing nature retreats have really smashed a lot of that for me. And I didn't realize how dug in I was actually until I went on retreat with Mark Coleman. He was like, just go sit in the woods, dude. Like, don't close your eyes. Like, don't sit cross-legged. Just like put down a blanket and lay in the field and like look at the trees. Like and I had this very kind of rigid structure about there's a certain way to sit and there's a certain way to do it. And there's all these certain things that you have to do correctly. And it really has done a great job for me in my life because I have found it to be deeply portable now. I did it 3 hours ago at my 6-year-old soccer practice. Watching 6-year-old kids play soccer is not that enjoyable, frankly. So I was able to tune into the land around me, into the Colorado mountains, into the weather. And it's just like, it's so portable. It's so portable. And Erin said it at the beginning. It's like, that is also the world. And I think one of the things that makes modern life so hard, one of the many things that makes modern life so hard is this theory that I've been kind of playing with called the two world theory. And then there's the world one, the world of present time awareness, the world of the five physical senses rising and passing away, the world of being in nature and everything happening in real time, coming and going, the world that we really want to be in. And then there's the world, that which is really out there, which the Buddha calls loka, the world of society and politics and states and issues and all these things that people have become, I think, in many ways hijacked by. And, what this reminds us, what it does for me is it reminds me to prioritize world one. The world of what's meaningful to me, the world of this in-breath, the world of my child playing on the soccer field, the world of making dinner for my family, the really trying to prioritize that which is really, really right in front of us, really, really happening right now, and to not abandon that world for this kind of conceptual overlay that Erin was talking about, the way that we do. It's very hard not to construct a world in our mind that somehow is different than the world of present time experience. Now, the problem is, I think, is that we're trying to find a middle way between these two worlds. And this is what makes it so challenging, I think, for a lot of us, is because we don't want to abandon world two either, but we do have to prioritize our own happiness and our own sense of well-being. And I have found that when I become in touch with that sense of well-being, that inherent sense of well-being, it really helps me prioritize, this is the world that I want to live in. And this is the world I actually have agency over. This is the world I can affect. This is the world of other people. This is the world of day-to-day living. I can do a lot in that world. And I'm always trying to remind myself, remembering to recognize that, slow down, stay put, focus on what really, really, what matters, what's meaningful, what's salient, what's available. And what this practice allows to do is being in the space, is it allows us to get in touch with that on a non-conceptual level. Because I understand, probably most of you understand what I'm talking about, but at the same time, it's so difficult to really take that back. My whole life being somebody in recovery and somebody who struggled with trauma and drug addiction, my whole life, no matter where I was, I always felt like I should be somewhere else. Like I remember living in Boston years ago, drinking in bars in Boston, in a crowded bar full of excitement, and looking out the window into the bar across the street and thinking I should probably be in that bar. I always had this haunting feeling that no matter if whatever retreat I was on, I should be on the other retreat. It's like that kind of like, I'm in the wrong place. I'm always in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing. And I actually, that did not go away. Maybe having kids has helped. But since I moved to Colorado, I remember moving to Colorado 8 years ago, and I haven't felt that way ever since. There's something, and this is just for me, this is just personally about living out in where we live. I live 45 minutes away from a traffic light. And I'm happy to be 45 minutes away from a traffic light. I don't really like traffic lights, actually. But there's something about just being in the natural experience that has just been completely restorative to my nervous system. Very restorative to the nervous system. In fact, I was in Denver a couple weeks ago, and as soon as the plane landed in Denver, I could feel my nervous system like, I got to drive to Denver in a couple days with my son to go to a baseball game, and I know I'm going to cross into a certain urban landscape, and something in my nervous system is going to activate, and there's no way I can stop that from happening. And it just reminds me that this is a feature of the modern world. It can become very addictive. In some ways, I can become addicted to that having, and you don't realize how toxic it is for many of us until we get free from it. There's Mark Coleman mentioned this, and I want to mention it. I'm glad I remembered because it was really profound to me. There's an African Aboriginal theory where they say the world is 3 days deep. I don't know if you ever heard this before, but the world is 3 days deep. And what that means is it takes 3 days to be out in the wilderness to actually get back to a circadian rhythm, back attuned to the natural experience. So it takes 3 days, which actually, if you think about it, it's not that bad. Like 3 days to get it out of your system. But I'll tell you what, for a lot of people, if you've done these retreats, if you sit these retreats, just know that's part of it, because the first 3 days can be challenging. It can be, as much as it sounds wonderful to say all these things, it doesn't always come easy. Giving up our creature comforts and giving up our stuff is a lot of times very, very challenging, but it's worth it. I think that happiness as a general state has a delayed onset. It's not immediate gratification. It has a delayed onset. Most things actually, I think Buddhist states of mind that we would want to cultivate, they have a delayed onset. Craving's pretty immediate. Greed, hatred, and confusion, they just come right up. But these other qualities, it takes a little bit more time to cultivate those, and it really allows the heart to open in a way that is immediate, that is spacious, and really something that is an experiential kind of practice. So I'm going to give Erin the last word before we open it up and see if there's anything that
Sure,
you
I'll
want to
just
add.
say I'll say a few things. We're talking about Vallecitos because Dave and I both teach and practice there. But these practices, this is like not a Vallecitos infomercial, right?
Yeah, right.
Because these practices are available to you wherever you are. I mean, sometimes, yeah, we're so fortunate to be in this beautiful river in the middle of nowhere, or sometimes we're turning on the faucet in our bathroom and that's our connection to water. And it's a moment to remember, where does your water come from? What is your watershed? Sometimes we go sit at the root of a tree in a beautiful forest, or sometimes we walk outside of an apartment building into a very urban area and can still ask the land to hold our meditation practice. We can still reflect upon how that invitation shifts our being. So I want to say that everything Dave and I are talking about um, doesn't belong to Vallecitos. You know, you can open these ways without ever coming to Vallecitos. These are 2,600-year-old elemental practices, and there is something powerful around the kind of field that Dave is pointing to. You know, I think kind of if people came to Vallecitos and didn't even have a meditation schedule, but just if people were just there, not on the devices, something great would happen. But to be there, not on the devices, with the support of a, relatively ecologically intact ecosystem, it's pretty remarkable because this land is connected to all other land. It's just a really great support. And I'll just end when we talk about land as Dharma teacher. It's easy to get teachings in the forms of words. We're offering a lot of words tonight. There are many web pages with a lot of words. There are books with a lot of words. Words are good. Words are important. It's the real job of a good teacher to transmit something deeper than words, to transmit some measure of their direct experience, And so there's a way that coming on into Vallecitos, for example, or a place like Vallecitos makes us available for a transmission that has to do with nature. The word Dhamma, Dhamma practice, it means nature. So there's a way that when we experience nature, we open to experiencing the Dhamma, the way things are. And when we practice Dhamma, we come to experience nature in a way that is much more native to our hearts and our bodies. So just appreciate you staying open to some of what we are pointing to together. It's really fun. It's really fun to reflect, and it's really fun to play around with ways of perceiving that decenter the human perceptual experience, but that open us to even more. So yeah, I don't have much more to add, Dave.
Maybe
Thank you.
these events are offered by our organization called the Secular Dharma Foundation, and we offer many free events. This is one of them. There is a link at our website. You can donate if you like. You can make a tax-free donation if you want to support these. We do these every month, and it's always the same link. So once you registered, you can kind of have it, and we'll put the audio and stuff in the link so you can have at it or share it out as much as you like. I like teaching this way because it's fun to have more of a discussion, which we will do now.